When somebody says Texas, you picture flat, dry, enormous. Well, that stops at the hill country, because west of Austin, the whole state changes. Bluebonnets down a fence line, a tube on the Guadalupe in August, and water cold enough to hurt, clear enough to count the stones. All of it's true, but it's hiding something, because outside Wimberley, at least 8 people have died inside Jacob's Well, and 6 times it's stopped flowing. Then, around Fredericksburg, peach trees need a cold winter to fruit, and there hasn't been one in 3 years. And in Kerr County, a neighbor can legally pump the water from under your land. So here's 35 facts the Texas Hill Country's been hiding from you. 35. The allergy that isn't a fever. West of Interstate 35, from the hills above Austin down through Bandera, one tree owns the canopy. Ash juniper, called mountain cedar out here, covers an estimated 8.6 million acres of Texas, roughly the area of Belgium under one species. A single tree releases billions of grains, and they all release at once. Most people assume you need allergies to get it. You don't. The Texas A&M Forest Service explains that juniper pollen isn't especially allergenic. There's simply so much of it that the body reads it as a threat and fights. The reaction isn't proportional to your immune system. It's proportional to the air, and unlike almost every other tree on the continent, ash juniper pollinates in winter, peaking in mid-January. Up to 1 in 5 Texans get it. Here's the detail nobody expects. The trees are cued by cold fronts. A norther comes through, and within hours the junipers let go. So the worst days follow the exact weather that ought to have cleaned the air, and the wind carries it. People in Dallas spend January congested because of trees 200 miles south of them. 34. The deer that won. The first axis deer arrived in Kerr County in 1932, shipped from India and kept behind high fence. Between escapes and sales, they went wild. You'd assume an exotic on a Texas ranch is a novelty behind wire. On a lot of this ground, it's now the common deer, and the native is in trouble. The mechanism is diet. Joyce Moore, a Texas parks and wildlife biologist in Gillespie County, lays it out. Axis switch to grass once the good browse is gone, and white-tailed deer cannot. A whitetail on a grazed-out pasture starves. An axis changes menu. They also browse on their hind legs, 7 feet up, in herds topping 150. After a census for the Cave Creek Wildlife Management Association, landowner Ronnie Ottmers reported what they counted over 3 nights. 347 white-tailed deer and 546 axis. Here's the image that stays with you. During the droughts of 2010 to 2013, Robert Stubblefield at Texas Tech photographed both species on the same ground. The axis were fat and sleek. The whitetails were thin and starving. 33. The fastest water in America. Secco Creek runs south through Medina County, past the little town of D'Hanis, and most of the year you could step across it. On May 31st, 1935, a storm parked over the basin above town. The National Weather Service records 22 inches of rain in 2 hours and 45 minutes, a world record for that duration. Peak discharge hit 230,000 cubic feet per second, off a basin of 142 square miles. Enough to fill an Olympic pool 2.5 times a second. The town went under, and 4 children and 1 woman drowned. You'd assume the danger out here is drought. It's the opposite problem, and the reason is the rock. This is karst limestone, and the Texas Water Development Board puts the consequence plainly. Thin soils, hard surfaces, and steep hills, funneling rainfall fast into narrow valleys. Here's the part that sticks. No rain gauge survived in the basin. Every container overflowed or washed away, so the record totals come from bucket surveys done afterwards. The storm destroyed the instruments measuring it. They still call this crescent along the escarpment Flash Flood Alley. 32. The President's sinking car. There's water at the LBJ Ranch, outside Stonewall in Gillespie County, that the Park Service keeps as a quiet historic landscape. Lyndon Johnson kept a car there that could swim. In 1962, he bought a light blue Amphicar Model 770, a German-made amphibious convertible. Only 3,878 were built, 1961 to 1968. You'd assume a presidential ranch is where a head of state goes to be serious. Johnson used his to frighten his own staff. The Park Service publishes the account of Joseph Califano Jr., his chief domestic policy aide, riding in the back with the staffer Vicky McCammon up front. They reached a steep incline at the edge of the lake. The car started rolling toward the water, and while it was still on the slope, Johnson shouted, "The brakes don't work! The brakes won't hold! We're going in! We're going under!" The car splashed in. Califano started climbing out. Then it leveled off and he understood what he was in. Johnson laughed, putted along the lake, and teased him all evening. The Park Service's own wording stays dry. He enjoyed surprising unsuspecting guests. 31. The eyeless things below. Northern Bexar County reads as ordinary sprawl, subdivisions, green belts, roads climbing toward the Edwards Plateau. Most people would tell you that's solid limestone underneath. It's honeycombed with humid, air-filled voids. And in December 2000, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service listed 9 invertebrates living in them as endangered. The rule calls them troglobites, obligate cave dwellers, of local distribution in Bexar County. 5 are spiders, 4 of those in the genus Sicurina. 3 are beetles, including the Helotes mold beetle. 1 is a harvestman, Texella cocondulferi, the robber baron cave harvestman. The listing describes them as eyeless, or essentially so. The service was blunt. Their proximity to San Antonio makes them vulnerable to the continuing expansion of the metropolitan area. Critical habitat came in 2003, revised in 2012 to cover all 9 across 4,216 acres, 6.5 square miles of suburb sitting on protected darkness. One name has since come off, the Bracken Cave meshweaver, removed in September 2022. Not because it died out, but because taxonomists decided it was the same animal as another listed spider. 8 species remain. 30. The wine country that doesn't grow the grapes. Drive Highway 290 out of Fredericksburg, and the tasting rooms come every few hundred yards. Vines out front. It reads as farmland. The Department of Agriculture's survey says otherwise. In 2019, the hill country produced 1,760 tons of wine grapes. The High Plains, flat former cotton country around Lubbock, 350 miles northwest, produced 10,300. This region grew about 1/8 of the state's crop. Texas A&M viticulturists put the High Plains share at 80 to 85%. The reason is climate. Up there is 3,400 feet, hot days, cool nights, dry air, while the rain down here brings fungal pressure. So the fruit is farmed in the Panhandle, crushed at facilities built to handle the distance, and finished and poured here. Now the part on the label. Federal rules require only 75% Texas-grown fruit for a bottle to be sold as Texas wine, meaning up to a quarter can legally come from outside the state. Everyone who's done the Fredericksburg wine trail has drunk this arrangement without being told. Real quickly, the comments on these videos are the best part. So if I missed something, and in a place this size I probably did, put it down there. I read all of them. Okay, back to it. 29. Rings older than the drought. In the shallows at Guadalupe River State Park in Kendall County, the bald cypress look like shade. They're instruments. In 2011, Malcolm Cleveland and colleagues published a drought reconstruction in the Texas Water Journal, built partly on cores from cypress at Guadalupe River State Park in Kendall County and Krause Springs in Burnett County. Those trees begin their record in the 1400s. The reconstruction runs 1500 to 2008. You'd assume the 1950s drought is the worst this landscape can do. That's the drought of record. And as the paper says, most water planners in Texas use 1950 to 1956 as their worst case. The rings disagree. For the Edwards Plateau, the driest 10 years in it are 1707 to 1716, drier on the index than 1948 to 1957. The single driest year is 1716. The driest 2, 3, 4, and 5-year spans all land in the 1500s. 1700s, or 1800s. The 1950s tops only the 6 and 7-year rankings. It's the worst the rain gauges have seen, not the worst that's happened here. The gauges start in 1895. The trees start in 1423. 28. The cedar choppers. Pull over at a scenic overlook west of Austin on the Loop 360 corridor. Everybody calls this untouched cedar country. It wasn't untouched, it was a workplace. From the 1890s until about 1960, cedar chopper families lived in work camps and creekside settlements. Scots-Irish out of Appalachia, settled west of the Balcones Fault since the mid-1800s. Ken Roberts, who recorded their oral histories, found each clan on its own creek. They hunted, trapped, ran moonshine, and by the early 20th century were cutting ash juniper, cedar locally, into fence posts and charcoal. Here's where it gets stranger. In the 1940s, Roberts documented a skilled cutter cleared about $25 in a day. A typical Austin laborer made that in a week. 7 days of town wages, swung out of the brush before dark. No foreman, no time clock. The city turned cedar chopper into a slur for redneck or hillbilly. Christy Boyd, a descendant, has never taken the term as an insult. They were hard workers, she says, and good people. The clearings, charcoal pits, and graveyards are still under the overlooks. The view has a labor history nobody put on a sign. 27. Castroville speaks Alsatian. 25 miles west of San Antonio, at the foot of the Balcones Escarpment, sits a town of stone houses everyone files under German-Texas. It isn't. Castroville was founded in 1844 by Henri Castro, who'd signed his impresario contract with the Republic of Texas in January 1842. He brought 2,134 German-speaking settlers between 1843 and 1847 and planted 4 towns: Castroville, Quihee, Vandenberg, D'Hanis. Most people would tell you that's a German colony. Wrong twice. The colonists were overwhelmingly Alsatian, and the record says which Alsace. 93.9% of the Alsatians who arrived between 1843 and 1869 came from the Upper Rhine, most from villages within 25 miles northwest of Mulhouse. A smaller number came later from northern Germany. Not Strasbourg, that's the north, a different variety. And Alsatian isn't a French-German hybrid, whatever its address suggests. It's Low Alemannic, a Germanic tongue tracing to the Alemanni, spoken inside France. The houses match: stone ground floors, vertical timber above, steep roofs, narrow lanes. Linguist Karen Roche interviewed 39 surviving speakers between 2007 and 2016, nearly all elderly, nobody underneath. The stones holding better than the sentences. 26. The rock piles are ovens. On Honey Creek in Mason County, between the crossroads of Grit and Streeter, there's a low mound of broken rock beside the water. Drive any ranch road on the Edwards Plateau, and you'll pass a dozen like it. Most people read them as bulldozer spoil. They're kitchens. Archaeologists call them burned rock middens, a low donut of heat-fractured rock with a hollow where the baking pit sat. Thousands of years ago, people here worked out that hot stone does what open fire cannot. It breaks down the carbohydrate locked in sotol and yucca hearts, inedible unless baked for a day or more. Empty the oven, shovel the spent rock to the rim, repeat. The ring grows. The Texas Department of Transportation uncovered this one in 1987 during a routine highway project. Archaeobotanist Phil Daring identified 14 plants in the charred remains, and dating put its use between 1110 and 1700 AD, an estimated 165 ovens on the same spot across 6 centuries. And the oldest object there wasn't made by any of them. A dart point napped 5,000 years before Christ, found on the ground, chipped down, and reused as a tool at the oven. 25. The bears turning up. In late September 2023, security cameras in Uvalde caught a black bear running through residential streets. It was captured and relocated. Most people would tell you there aren't bears in the hill country. That's half right, and the wrong half matters. Unregulated hunting and predator control had all but erased black bears from Texas by about 1950, leaving a remnant in the mountains of Coahuila and Chihuahua. In the 1990s, bears began crossing the Rio Grande into Big Bend and Black Gap. Diana Doan Kreider's work in the 1990s confirmed they'd come from Mexico. Young males wander. The Borderlands Research Institute has tracked single bears covering 80 miles between Terlingua Ranch and Mexico, 3 marathons back-to-back. Uvalde, Real, and Edwards counties sit inside the state's map of confirmed reports. But that isn't a population. Texas Parks and Wildlife is explicit. The only bear population in Texas is in the Trans-Pecos plus Val Verde and Crockett counties. And one animal turning up doesn't mean bears live there. The nearest breeding females are in the limestone canyons near Comstock. The canyons above Leakey just get visitors. 24. Llanite's blue quartz. 9 miles north of Llano, State Highway 16 cuts through a rock nobody stops for. Pink feldspar in dark ground mass, studded with quartz crystals that aren't clear. They're blue. Locals called it opaline granite. J.P. Iddings named it Llanite after the county. You might assume the color means some exotic mineral. It doesn't. The quartz is ordinary silica. The blue is Rayleigh scattering off ilmenite grains too small to see. The same effect that makes the sky blue. Zelensky, Sylvester, and Rogers pinned that down in 1988. The rock dates to 1,106 million years. Here's the correction nobody makes at the guardrail. This isn't the only blue quartz on Earth. Rock-forming blue quartz is reported on every continent. The 2022 study that characterized the Llano crystals compared them with occurrences in Bahia, Brazil, and Albesti, Romania. Llano is the reference case for magmatic blue quartz. It isn't one roadside band either. The USGS traced the dike north 6.5 miles, then northeast to Wilburn's Glen and west past Babyhead. The highway cut a window into it. 23. The songbird delisted. At the Kerr Wildlife Management Area west of Kerrville, there's a bird surviving on land you'd call neglected. The black-capped vireo, nesting in scrappy oak shrub a landowner eyes with a brush hog. When it was listed as endangered in 1987, there were only about 350 known to exist. It was hit from 2 directions: habitat closing up and brown-headed cowbirds laying eggs in vireo nests, so the parents raised cowbird chicks instead of their own. But the habitat problem wasn't bulldozers. It was fire suppression. Keep fire out, and the low shrub these birds need grows into closed woodland. This is where the fix was worked out: repeated prescribed burning to hold the shrub open, and seasonal cowbird trapping year after year. Male territories climbed from 27 in 1986 to around 500, and nest parasitism fell from 75% to 12. One management area now holds more territories than the whole species did at listing. It came off the list in 2018, and the service credits something nobody would guess. Texas goat numbers collapsed after Congress repealed the National Wool Act, which meant less browsing, which let the shrub come back. 22. The 3-Day Canyon. Northwest of New Braunfels in Comal County, below the dam at Canyon Lake, there's a bedrock gorge that didn't exist 25 years ago. Everything you've been taught says canyons take time. Water finds a weakness, and a few 100,000 years later, a gorge. This one didn't. In July 2002, the lake rose until it poured over its emergency spillway, a structure built to save the dam, not to be used. Water ran over from July 4th to August 10th, and the largest discharges lasted about 3 days. When it stopped, the valley below was gone. In its place, bedrock canyon, soil stripped off, boulders 3 feet across shoved downstream, 23 feet of limestone excavated from the floor. Michael Lamb and Mark Fonstad published the measurements in Nature Geoscience in 2010. Their point wasn't the spectacle, but the record. A canyon with its before and after both measured, the discharge gauged, the topography mapped either side. A rare natural experiment, in their words. The Guadalupe Blanco River Authority, which manages the 64-acre gorge, counts Cretaceous limestone, fossils, and dinosaur footprints 110 million years old, with faults and seeps exposed in the walls. You can walk it on a guided tour. 21. The Revolver's Proving Ground. In Sisterdale, Kendall County, a historical marker carries one line about a fight nobody stops for. You'd assume the age of the repeating pistol began in an eastern factory. It began on the creek behind that marker. On June 8, 1844, Ranger Captain John Coffey, Jack Hayes, and about 14 Texas Rangers ran into a raiding party of nearly 80 Comanche warriors at Walker's Creek. Hayes's men carried Colt Patterson revolvers bought a year earlier. 5 shots, no reloading in between. And instead of dismounting to fire, they charged and kept firing from the saddle. 14 men routed 80. Here's where the story goes wrong. That fight didn't rescue Samuel Colt. His Patterson works had already failed in 1842, 2 years before Walker's Creek, because the guns weren't selling. What the battle won him was the devotion of frontier Texans. The money came 2 years later, in November 1846, when a former ranger who'd fought in that skirmish, Samuel H. Walker, ordered 1,000 improved revolvers for the Mexican War. The Creek proved the weapon. A man who was there sold it. 20. Bracken Cave's Bat Metropolis. In southern Comal County, a ranch gate north of San Antonio gives away nothing. Most people would tell you Texas's famous bats are the ones under Austin's Congress Avenue Bridge. That's not the big one. Behind that gate is Bracken Cave, and Texas Parks and Wildlife calls it the world's largest bat colony. More than 15 million Mexican free-tailed bats in one collapsed sinkhole every summer. Bat Conservation International, which owns the land, calls it one of the largest concentrations of mammals on Earth. It's a maternity roost, and the population roughly doubles in late June when the pups are born. The dusk emergence can take 3 hours to empty the cave, and it's too dense to count by eye, so they count it with radar. Researchers used weather surveillance radar to produce nightly estimates of the colony for 23 straight years, from March 1995 to November 2017. Equipment built to track thunderstorms was tracking bats instead. The group began buying the site in 1992, with 4.7 acres around the entrance. The preserve now covers about 1,458 acres, holding the suburbs back from the gate. 19. Pedernales Falls Ancient Riverbed. At the north end of Pedernales Falls State Park in Blanco County, the river doesn't drop off a cliff. It walks down a staircase. 50 feet of descent over 3,000 feet of channel. You might think every pale ledge in the hill country is the same rock. That riverbed is Marble Falls limestone, laid down on a shallow seafloor in the Pennsylvanian. Texas Parks and Wildlife puts it at 300 million years old. The Bureau of Economic Geology says 320. Either way, it's 200 million years older than the Cretaceous limestone that makes up nearly all the rest of the region, and older than the dinosaurs whose tracks turn up elsewhere in Texas. The tilt is the giveaway. The Llano uplift canted these beds about 10 degrees to the southeast. 115 million years ago, Cretaceous seas draped flat layers over the top. Where the two meet, you're looking at an angular unconformity, a seam holding 200 million years of missing time. That gap is longer than the whole age of the dinosaurs. Families scramble across it every summer without a second look. 18. Camp Verde's Camel Corps. On Verde Creek in Kerr County, the United States Army once kept camels, not as a novelty, as policy. In 1856, Camp Verde became headquarters for 40 camels sent west by Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, and a second shipment of 41 followed. The Army tested them for hauling burdens and for pursuit across dry country, and they delivered. A camel could take a load over ground where a mule balked, but the handlers detested them, being used to something more docile. Then the war came. Camp Verde was surrendered to the Confederacy in 1861, and 80 camels and 2 Egyptian drivers went with it. The herd came apart. Some were turned out on the open range near the post. Some hauled cotton bales toward Brownsville. One ended up with Captain Sterling Price's infantry command, carrying the whole company's baggage all war. Union troops reoccupied the post in 1865, and it was the restored federal government, not the Confederacy, that sold the survivors at auction in 1866. 66 to a buyer named Coopwood. Camp Verde is still on the map. 17. Garner's Nightly Dance. 90 miles west of San Antonio, on a bend of the Frio River in Uvalde County, a concrete pavilion has been a dance floor for most of a century. Most people would tell you a state park is a daytime place. Garner runs the other way. Civilian Conservation Corps Company 879 built this park, and they reportedly started the dance in the late 1930s, while the work was still going on. The tradition stuck after Garner opened in 1941. Early on, it was live bands on Saturday nights, and the dancers had their own take on West Coast swing they called the Garner Whip. The jukebox everybody associates with the place didn't arrive until sometime in the 1950s. The first one played 45s. The one out there now is neon lit and digital, and the dance runs nightly through the summer, from Memorial Day weekend until mid-August. People who grew up coming here get married and bring their own families back to the same slab of concrete, which is part of why Garner is still one of the most visited state parks in Texas. 16. Gorman Falls still grows. Colorado Bend State Park sits on the Colorado River about 10 miles above Lake Buchanan, and the hike to Gorman Falls ends at something most visitors read backwards. You'd assume a waterfall is water cutting rock away. Here, the water's doing the opposite. Gorman Springs feeds Gorman Creek, which tumbles off a 70-foot bluff in San Saba County, and that whole face is travertine, rock formed from minerals carried in the spring water and left behind as it evaporates. The cliff isn't being worn down, it's being made layer over ferns and moss and whatever else stands in the way until it reads less like a waterfall than a cave wall turned outward. Texas Parks and Wildlife puts the travertine here at 60 feet thick, almost as tall as the falls, and it's still going. The agency warns that the rock is delicate enough that touching it can interfere with its growth and change the falls forever, which is why the face is off limits. It's one of the few landforms in Texas you can visit while it's still under construction. 15. Comfort's half-masted flag. On a small lot in Comfort, Kendall County, a limestone obelisk carries a German inscription, Treue der Union, loyalty to the Union. You'd assume the German hill country sat the Civil War out, or quietly went along with the Confederacy. This stone says otherwise, and what it marks didn't happen here. On the morning of August 10, 1862, a party of hill country Unionists, between 61 and 68 men under Major Fritz Tegener, was camped on the west bank of the Nueces River, about 20 miles from Fort Clark, in what's now Kinney County, roughly 120 miles southwest of Comfort. They were trying to reach Mexico. 94 mounted Confederate soldiers under Lieutenant C.D. McRae attacked them there. 19 Unionists were killed in the fighting. 9 were wounded, held, and executed a few hours later. The bodies were left unburied. In October, 8 more were killed attempting that same crossing. Nobody gathered the dead until 1865, when the remains came to Comfort and were buried on ground bought that August. An 1866 36-star flag flies over the monument permanently at half-staff. 14. Jacob's Well stops 6 times. Outside Wimberley, in Hayes County, there's a circle of blue water sitting in the bed of Cypress Creek. Ask anyone what Jacob's Well is, and they'll say swimming hole. It's the mouth of a cave. Water rises here under its own pressure out of the Trinity Aquifer, and divers with the Jacob's Well Exploration Project have mapped more than 6,000 feet of flooded passage under that opening, down to a maximum depth of 137 feet. That survey makes it the longest cave in Hayes County, and the second longest fully submerged cave in Texas. Between 1960 and 1985, at least 8 people died in it. Here's where it gets stranger. For all of recorded history, this spring simply ran. Then in 2000, it went dry. The first time anyone had ever seen that happen. In August 2023, it stopped for the 6th time on record, and every one of those 6 has come in the last 23 years. Swimming's been closed to the public since June 2022, and it hasn't reopened. The water's the same color it always was. What's changed is whether it'll be there at all. 13. The Camp City. 9 miles south of Kerrville on State Highway 16, there's a gate, a cattle guard, and 60 acres of oak-dotted pasture. For 18 days a year, it becomes the second largest community in Kerr County. This is Quiet Valley Ranch, home of the Kerrville Folk Festival, and what people get wrong is where the work happens. You'd assume Texas songwriters get made in Austin clubs. The festival's own history says the heart and soul of the whole thing lives in the campground. Impromptu jam sessions around campfires at any hour, a 24-hour-a-day treat. That campfire singing became a worldwide trademark of the festival. Rod Kennedy founded it in 1972, and the first festival ran June 1st to 3rd in Kerrville itself. The ranch came later, 60 acres bought in December 1973, the first outdoor event there in May 1974. It settled into its 18-day, 3-weekend shape by 1987, and about 30,000 people moved through the run. It calls itself the oldest music festival in Texas, which is the honest version, because the run isn't unbroken. 2020 was canceled, 2021 went virtual, and that's why the 50th landed in 2022. 12. Texas's only nesting bird. The ridges between Austin and San Antonio are covered in scrubby cedar and oak, the kind of brush people clear without thinking twice. Of the nearly 360 bird species that breed in Texas, exactly 1 nests nowhere else on Earth. The golden-cheeked warbler is the only bird that nests exclusively in Texas. Not mostly, only. And it's narrower than that. It needs mature juniper oak woodland in the limestone hills and canyons of the hill country, between roughly 590 and 1,700 feet of elevation, with ash juniper among Shin, Lacey, Spanish, and Plateau live oak. Its nest is a cup woven from long strips of bark taken off mature ash juniper, and Cornell's description is that the cup is held together partly by spider silk. A young stand doesn't give it that bark, so the bird's tied to woodland that's been left alone. It arrives in March, raises its young, and leaves in July to winter in Mexico and Central America. So that unremarkable cedar break behind a subdivision isn't spare ground. It's the only kind of place this bird can breed. 11. Herman Lehmann's Two Worlds. On a May morning in 1870, a 10-year-old was hoeing corn on his family's farm near Loyal Valley, Mason County, when an Apache raiding party of 8 to 10 men took him. Herman Lehmann's parents, Moritz and Augusta Johanna, were German immigrants. Most people picture the frontier as a clean line. Lehmann erases it. Among the Apaches, he was adopted by the war leader Carnivist and made a warrior. After killing an Apache medicine man in revenge, he fled, joined a Comanche band, took the name Montechina, and was befriended by Quanah Parker at Fort Sill. U.S. authorities identified him as a captive and sent him home against his wishes, May 12, 1878. He had to learn German again. He refused pork. He wouldn't sleep in a bed. He'd appear in traditional dress at moments his neighbors thought inappropriate. And by his own account, in 9 Years Among the Indians, published 1927, that pull never faded. He did settle, married Fanny Light in 1890, raised 5 children, died in 1932 at his brother Willie's ranch. He's buried at Loyal Valley, in the ground he was taken from. We're into the final 10 now, and the strangest ones are still ahead. 10. The Cave of Fault Opened. A mile southwest of the courthouse in San Marcos, in southern Hays County, there's a roadside attraction with a gift shop, a train, and an observation tower. Underneath sits Wonder World Cave. You'd expect a Texas show cave to be the usual arrangement: limestone, groundwater, slow dissolution, stalactites. The Handbook of Texas puts it flatly. The fissure was opened not by erosion, but by the earthquake that produced the Balcones Fault. Wonder World is a fault line cave, a crack pulled open by movement along the fault zone that forms the eastern edge of the Edwards Plateau. The Texas Speleological Survey calls it an almost straight crack in the Edwards limestone, its walls later modified by water. Water did the finishing. It didn't do the digging. It's reported to be the only commercially operated dry-formed cave in the United States. Along the Balcones zone, the vertical displacement runs to about 600 feet in places, the height of a 55-story building. Walk the tour route, and the fault line is visible in the ceiling over your head. You're standing inside the break. 9. The Kerrville Cure Boom. The hospital campus on the hills above Kerrville was built for people who came to breathe. You'll hear it was the dry air. Kerr County isn't dry. The Handbook of Texas gives its annual rainfall as 30 inches, on elevations of 1,500 to 2,000 feet. What drew them was reputation. By the 1920s, the handbook says, Kerr County had a reputation as one of the healthiest locations in the country, and that reshaped its healthcare and demographics. This was decades before antibiotics. Several sanatoriums here were already caring for pulmonary patients in the late 1800s and early 1900s. In 1915, San Antonio investors bought 1,000 acres of a dude ranch called My Ranch and turned it into the Mountain Park Sanatorium for tuberculosis patients. Dr. Sam E. Thompson bought it in 1917 and put his own name on it. Separately, in 1919, the American Legion of Texas began what became the Kerrville VA. In April 1921, it handed the unfinished buildings and 748 acres to the state. The first patients arrived that June, and it opened in July 1923 as the country's 93rd Veterans Hospital. 8. The Meusebach-Comanche Treaty. In early March 1847, on the lower San Saba, John O. Meusebach sat down with the Panatica Comanche head chiefs, Buffalo Hump, Santa Anna, and Mopechucope, called Old Owl. The German colony he spoke for held title to the Fisher-Miller land grant, named for Henry Francis Fisher and Burchard Miller, more than 3 million acres between the Llano and Colorado rivers, which the Handbook of Texas calls Comanche hunting grounds. Meusebach rode into it with about 40 men and no troops. Both sides could move through the other's country, and the San Saba Catawba lands would be surveyed for presents and payment. It was ratified at Fredericksburg on May 9, 1847. Now the part the gift shops get wrong. You'll be told it's the treaty neither side ever broke. No historian says that. The strongest wording the handbook gives is that the settlers had established a lasting treaty with the local Comanches in 1847. And peace didn't mean an unarmed frontier. The Army put Fort Martin Scott 2 miles outside Fredericksburg on December 5, 1848. 20 months later, the treaty was real. It's the version without the fort that gets sold. 7. The uncounted predator. In a dry creek bed near Leakey, there's a track the width of your palm. Mountain lions live along the hill country's western edge, in the Frio and Nueces canyons. You'd assume a big cat in an American state is managed like a deer herd. Seasons, tags, quotas, a number. In Texas, there was no number. The mountain lion is a non-game species. You need a hunting license, and that's where the rules stopped. No closed season, no harvest limit, no bag limit. Reporting voluntary. Of the 16 states with breeding lion populations, Texas was the only one that didn't regulate hunting or trapping. In 1971, 2 bills reached the Texas legislature, one to make the lion a game animal, one to protect it. Neither passed. A 1992 petition for protection was denied. Then in 2024, after a stakeholder group reported the state couldn't estimate its own lion population, the Parks and Wildlife Commission adopted the first lion rules in more than 50 years. Canned hunts banned, and traps checked inside 36 hours. Still no quota. Still no mandatory reporting. 6. The diving pig. For decades, the main attraction at Spring Lake in San Marcos was a pig. Ralph the Swimming Pig debuted in the 1950s in the Submarine Theater at Aquarina Springs, where the audience sat below the surface, and the show opened with his swine dive. Add glass-bottom boats and mermaids, and it's pure roadside kitsch. Here's where it gets stranger. Those docks sat over one of the deepest human records on the continent. Archaeologists at the San Marcos Springs have blocked out a cultural sequence covering 12,000 years. Texas State University's own archive puts human presence here at upwards of 13,500 years. Clovis people lived here between 9 and 10,000 BC, apparently the first. Texas State's public archaeology program calls it one of the longest continuously inhabited places in North America. The reason is water. These springs have rarely stopped flowing, even in severe drought, so nobody had a reason to leave. The lake bed holds hearths and tool-making from the Paleo-Indian era to the late prehistoric. They set the pig show's concrete straight onto it. 5. Rock Springs Mohair Country. Drive west to Rock Springs, seat of Edwards County, and what you see is rock, cedar, shin oak, and thornbrush, ground that looks like it never produced anything. It produced almost all of America's mohair. Angora goats browsed the brush that defeated the plow, and by the 1920s, Texas ranchers ran 2 million of them, and clipping more than 80% of the American crop. In 1925, the National Association of Angora Breeders moved its headquarters from Missouri to Rock Springs, recognizing how completely Texas raisers dominated the industry. Edwards County peaked in 1940 with 331,970 sheep and 376,322 Angora goats counted inside one county line. And Rock Springs started calling itself top of the world. America never led the world in mohair though. South Africa did, and still does. The United States ranked second, and as much as 97% of the American clip came off Texas. The national peak landed in 1965, 31,584,000 pounds, shorn from 4,612,000 goats. Then it went. In 2024, Texas produced 325,000 pounds from 63,000 Angoras, about 1% of the height. The brush it ran on hasn't moved. 4. The lizard's paper trail. That horny toad in the grass on a Blanco County ranch may be a known individual in a database. Texas horned lizards are gone from much of their former range and listed as threatened in the state. Squeezed out as invasive red imported fire ants, displaced the harvester ants they eat and attacked them directly. Texas Parks and Wildlife's decade of monitoring found fire ant abundance predicted horned lizard density negatively, so the zoos started breeding them. The San Antonio Zoo has released roughly 340 captive bred lizards since 2020 onto a private Blanco County ranch. The Fort Worth Zoo put 617 hatchlings on the ground at Mason Mountain Wildlife Management Area in Mason County in 2024. 301 hatched in Fort Worth. Here's what nobody guesses. None of them carry a tag. Every lizard is photographed belly up first, because the pattern of black spots underneath works as a de facto fingerprint. Biologists follow them by genetically testing droppings left on the property, matched against a cloacal swab taken at release. The zoo has even used specially trained dogs to sniff them out, part of a detection network it built with a professional handler. 3. Counting cold hours. Along Highway 290 outside Fredericksburg, the hand-painted peaches signs look permanent. They aren't. A Gillespie County peach crop depends on the trees getting cold enough, long enough in midwinter, counted by the hour. Chill hours are hours spent between 32 and 45 degrees. Varieties need anywhere from 200 to 1,000, and hill country orchards normally bank 650 to 800 across a winter, the better part of a month's worth of cold, an hour at a time. Come up short, and the trees bud late and barely produce. Fredericksburg has now fallen short 3 years running. Diane Eckhart, a third-generation grower. The piece that we were lacking this year to have a full crop was the cold hours, the chill hours. Larry Stein of Texas A&M AgriLife Extension says the struggle is, we just haven't had the cold weather. A warm winter shrinks the crop, in the worst years, toward a tenth of normal. The opposite problem erases it. In 2023, orchards carrying peaches the size of dimes and quarters lost the fruit outright to 2 nights below freezing. 2. The 1904 rule. Across Kerr, Bandera, and Comal counties, the water in the well casing isn't the aquifer you've heard of. The Edwards has its own authority and its own permit system. Most hill country homes don't drink it. Theirs is the Trinity, a system that refills much slower. The Texas Water Development Board puts its recharge at 3.5 to 5% of the rain. Pumping climbed from about 15,000 acre-feet a year in 1981 to over 20,000 by 1997. The law underneath isn't what you'd assume. In 1904, in Houston and Texas Central Railway versus East, the Texas Supreme Court adopted the rule of capture. The owner on top can pump and use the water with few restrictions, whatever it does to the neighbors, even when it's drained from under someone else's land. The court has since held the rule isn't absolute, and the legislature got room to regulate. 88% of the Trinity now sits inside a groundwater conservation district that permits and limits pumping. The default is still capture. The districts are what stand between it and the well next door. 1. The land nobody could plow. We end where it all began, dirt, and how little this place has. Under the Edwards Plateau, Cretaceous limestone. Over it, almost nothing. Soil surveys record under 10 inches in places, 10 to 20 across the rest. Then cemented rock. On Freeman Ranch near San Marcos, the stony uplands carry 6. So it never became row crop country at scale. Some cotton and sorghum in the deeper valleys, a livestock sideline. The Handbook of Texas is flat about it. The lack of deep soils for farming made this a grazing region. One estimate puts 98% in rangeland. Be careful what you credit. The caves and springs owe ranching nothing. Limestone dissolving in water. Here, whatever anyone grew. This country isn't untouched. Its plant communities are driven by grazing, fire, and climate, and clear-cutting degraded already fragile soils. Ranching rewrote this landscape. It never froze it. What thin soil preserved was scale and stillness. Ground never turned over keeps what's lying on it. The campsites, the middens, the surface of the past. Land in big private blocks stays big enough to hold what needs room. That's ending. In Kimball County, a 34% jump in unincorporated population is ranches carved into ranchettes. Between 1997 and 2022, Texas lost nearly 3.7 million acres of working land, 1.8 million in the last 5 years, close to 1,000 acres a day, more than Central Park, every day. Andrew Sansom of the Meadows Center says Texas loses rural land faster than any state, most acutely here. This place was never protected. It was skipped, and now it's been noticed. So that's what's underneath the postcard. Country that stayed rough because it had no choice and held on to things the rest of Texas paved over. Tell me which one you'd never heard of. I'll be reading. Subscribe and I'll take you somewhere else that's been quietly keeping secrets.